Hello, my friends. There's a bunch of crows over there. That's not a good sign. Well, as the world sleeps, I'm out and about doing my thing. One of the things when you are a recluse, you get a lot done when the world's sleeping. Less people that you got to bump into. Anyway, I wanted to tell you guys that recently I had a really amazing chat with one of my most informative commenters. You all are wonderful. You all teach me something. When we talk about Prince, you know him as S.A., no, not Sons of Anarchy, but as a solitary adventurer. We had a great chat. Hopefully it's going to be a part one of a series. You guys, if you guys could watch it, comment, post questions you'd like for us to talk about. And who knows, maybe down the road I'll have some of you on as guests too to talk about it. I think you'll really enjoy this. We talk a little bit more about Prince's early days. Let's see what you guys think. Remember, comment, give me suggestions, post more questions that you'd like me to ask the solitary adventurer down the road. This guy, since I started posting Prince reaction videos, has been an encyclopedia of well-researched knowledge, and he's done a lot to educate me, as you all have, on all things Prince. Check it out. Let me know what you think. All right, everybody. Here we are. Yes, you can play guitar, and we have a lot of wonderful commenters out there, especially when we get on some of the Prince videos. I love and appreciate you all, and as you know, I try and make sure I can respond to all the comments. You guys may know my guest today. He is an encyclopedia of Prince, and I'm very happy to finally meet him and have him on. His name is A Solitary Adventurer. I'm sure you all are familiar with him in the comment section. He's done a lot to educate me, and good to finally meet you. Welcome aboard.
And you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So let's just start from the beginning. If I may mention, you're from England?
Yes, Liverpool.
Okay, so home of the Beatles. Home of the Beatles. Yep. If you're in Birmingham, we'd say Black Sabbath. But what famous bands from Nottingham?
I don't know. Did Robin Hood play anything?
Robin Hood. Yeah. Okay, so let's just take a minute and let's just talk about how you got into Prince, because your knowledge of Prince is pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, I would imagine it seems that way, especially with the way I write the comments. But I've been a fan for over 25 years. So I came to Prince around 93, 94. It was actually through my brother, who is much more, he's 3 years older than me. He's much more of a music head than I am. So he was into everything. And it's a strange one with Prince because, you know, the style of music is all over the place. So I'd heard Purple Rain, I'd heard Gold, which was out at the time. I'd heard all these Raspberry Beret, all of these famous songs, but I'd never actually realized they were one guy, and it was the same guy. So he brought home the greatest hits compilation, the hits 1 and 2, and this triple package that was called the B-sides. So suddenly we had, 36 songs, and they were all amazing. And we just went down the rabbit hole together, my brother and I. And I got to see him for the first time in 1998 at Wembley, the smaller Wembley, the arena.
Okay, but so still
15,000, 16,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was the time where he was still doing the splits and running around the stage, maybe not playing as many instruments as I would have liked, but it was kind of the last of the high energy years that he had. And sorry, stop me if I'm...
No, carry on, please. This is great.
So I was just going to say, by the time he passed, I think I'd seen him 36 times in some form or other.
How many of you out there can say you've seen him 36 times? I never even got to see him once.
Plenty.
Oh my God. And was this in North America too, or was it just in England?
It was large majority were just England, but I was lucky enough to see him at the Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland.
And what year was that? Was that the 2009 one?
That was the 2013. The 2009 is the reason why so many people made the effort to get over for the 2013.
Okay, because
the 2009 is phenomenal.
The videos I've done, the reaction videos to from 2009, they blew me away. So, one of the things, let's we could talk about this forever, but let's kind of address it. We get a lot of comments. I'm going to quickly give my viewpoint as I have in the comment section. With Prince, how come so many of us missed the boat on Prince, and why are we only kind of really discovering it now? Well, I think part of it, I believe it's been mentioned in the comments, is because He was pretty aggressive with people making YouTube posts about anything to do with him. I did say too as well, Don Henley from the Eagles, he actually has a staff that he pays to scour YouTube.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Eagles is another story. I read Don Felder's book. I'm going to do a review of it. It's quite good. But getting back to it, I, as a guitar player, I was into more of the hard rock metal stuff in the 80s. But I religiously collected all the guitar magazines from the late 80s into the early 90s. I don't even remember seeing one thing about Prince. I could be wrong. And, over time, I'd like to actually start to go through some of those magazines again, look through. But to my knowledge, I don't remember seeing anything about Prince. So in the mainstream guitar media, I didn't see much about him at all. So I think that's part of it. Someone did mention, could racism have been a part of it? And I'm just like, you know what? I stay away from that. I'm like a white guy from Canada. Like, who am I to comment about? Some people argue, well, Jimi Hendrix was in all the magazines. Vernon Reid from Living Color, when I remember when their first album came out in '88, he was all over the magazines. He's a great talent as well. I don't know. I don't know on that end. I don't know enough about it. I don't even feel right commenting about it because I don't know. I think for the majority of people, we kind of related to him as, and I want to get your opinion on this in a second. We related to him more as an entertainer, singer, performer, kind of in the Michael Jackson mold. I think that's where my mindset was at. I didn't have a problem with Prince. I thought, okay, he's very good at what he does. I have my earliest memory of him is something to do with Purple Rain, maybe some commercials. He had a guitar around his shoulder. And the beginning of the guitar is when the doves cry. Sorry, I got so many thoughts in my head here. I have a few memories of him with the guitar, but it tended to center around his performance. What are your thoughts on why so many people miss the boat about how actually musically, I don't know of any other people that are that amazing with so many different instruments. So what is it about? Why do you think in the 80s so many of us missed the boat on him and into the 90s?
I think a lot of it is geographical. And then I think as his career progressed, he was kind of making, in my own opinion, nobody knows for sure because he didn't really tell anyone, even when he gave interviews. He was always quite cryptic. But I think as his career progressed, he quite deliberately managed how he was seen. So if I cover the first part, in the 80s, he's known for so many things, but his live show is very much, the front man running around. At times he makes James Brown look nailed to the floor because
Yeah,
he's so energetic.
yeah.
And yet you could argue he's maybe not picking the best songs to be the singles. Once Purple Rain happened and he's a superstar, he actually starts making quite counterproductive career choices.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't follow it up with Purple Rain 2 and solidify it for fear, I think, of becoming like Bon Jovi, where all the albums sound the same, for 30 odd years.
Mm-hmm.
He deliberately goes and tries to challenge his audience. And then once you get into the 90s, the battle with Warner Brothers is the great big shadow over an entire decade where musically he's pushing in ways that he hadn't for
Mm-hmm.
10 years prior. But he's also being lambasted in the media because of the name change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that turned off a lot of America. And that's why I say it's a geographical thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the late 80s and the early 90s, Prince was huge in Europe and would continue to sell out and would prefer, you would argue, when you look at his tour dates, to be touring Europe more so than he would America.
Okay.
And then he sort of wins America back in the early 2000s when he does the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's kind of accepted himself as being an elder statesman of music. And he, I think, then consciously tries to win over the people who he feels have maybe overlooked his talent.
Yeah.
And because he's not running around the stage because age has caught up with him to some extent, he becomes a guy who's showing off his musicianship rather than it's 5 minutes of a concert. It becomes an hour of him playing guitar. And once people saw how well he could play guitar, it was a little bit of a two fingers up to Rolling Stones when he did the While My Guitar Gently Weeps, he's deliberately telling people, you've overlooked me. I might not be in your magazines, but
Mm-hmm.
when they published their best guitarists of all time, and he was like 30th or even lower, it was an insult. So he goes out and he just smoked the stage up. And I think at that point he realized that maybe I need to be a little bit better with the PR here and show people what I can do.
Because it was that I did a reaction video because I'd heard a lot about this solo he did at while my guitar gently weeps. Sorry, I'm on too much caffeine, everybody. While My Guitar Gently Weeps. I heard about it and I did. That was a legitimate, if I remember, it was a pretty legitimate reaction video. I'm watching going, holy, I didn't, and I think that woke a lot of people up. And I do know that happened for Billy Gibbons too. He had no idea until he was either there or he was there in person and saw it. But for me, that was kind of like the awakening going, wait a second. I knew he could kind of play guitar, but a lot of frontmen, I'll give you an example. Vince Neil from Motley Crue would be an example of a guy. Sometimes he'll hold the guitar and he'll kind of maybe strum a little bit, but he's not, I don't know. Sometimes they use it more as an ornament or something than an actual.
Yes.
So, but going back to the beginning, okay, and probably what's going to happen here, folks, we could have a long talk. So we're probably going to do a part 1, and then down the road, any questions you guys want me to bring up or talk about, post it in the comment section, and we'll get to a part 2 in a few weeks or down the road. He had a lead guitar player in the beginning named, is it Des Dickerson?
Yes, in early 80s, Des Dickerson, yes.
Okay, if we could take a minute and talk about that. I still have to check out a bit more of his playing, so I can't really comment on his playing. I'm realizing with Prince, I'm going to post another reaction video. I won't tell you what, but to him today, and the band was just so awesome. I'm like, oh my God. He would be very demanding. I've never played in his band. God, wouldn't that be awesome? But I can already tell like he would be very, I want things this way, and that's good. It's his project. It's his vision. He's paying the bills. He's paying everybody. This is how I want it. Absolutely, that's the way it should be. But it'd be interesting to see if he wore any musicians out who were working for him when they were just like, dude, I can't keep this up.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly wore engineers out because it's one thing to rehearse and do something that you love, right? Playing an instrument.
Yeah.
If you see any interviews with the Revolution, and obviously Des is kind of in the Revolution and then leaves just before Purple Rain makes the Revolution super famous, but he is in that first iteration of the Revolution. The engineers talk about him doing 36 hours in the studio in one hit. Yeah. And they would have to tap out and switch in an engineer halfway through, or start giving him decaf coffee, to try and kill his energy off. Yeah. But the musicians in the Revolution talk about it almost becoming like a Zen practice of playing a groove for 50, 60 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's almost like boot camp. They become so proficient at playing those songs. And when I look back now, because obviously, to use a phrase that John Mayer said in an interview that I watched recently, he said Prince signed the painting when he passed. Yeah. And now you can look at it as one whole, and you can see what he was trying to get across. Mm-hmm. And I kind of look at it now and I think he worked those bands so hard so that he could improvise over the top of them.
Okay.
So that they would be doing it as muscle memory, and it would give him the ultimate freedom. That he would know that they could hold that groove, they could stop on the one, they could do everything that he needed them to do.
Yeah.
And it could be a 3-hour concert and they wouldn't run out of stamina or ability.
Do you know if he dismissed any musicians publicly for not being able to keep up to the pressure?
Yeah, he didn't embarrass anyone. But if you look back through the band members who maybe had a short stint, or they were only there for the recording of one album, which might be a week, there was an album that came out last year, a posthumous album called Welcome to America. And he assembled some really top class musicians, who were well known in the industry. And a lot was made when the album came out publicly about, look at these musicians, they're fantastic. But I would argue it's not really that evident on the album. He's got them for 3 or 4 days, I would argue the drummer is a far better drummer than he gets to show on the album, as
Okay.
is the bassist. And what they've actually done is just recorded a jam session.
Yeah.
And they then sort of disband. He puts the project in the infamous vault, and away they go. But if you look back through his history, there are people who they maybe last, one tour or
And,
6 years behind the scenes.
sometimes it might have nothing to do with their musicianship or their work ethic, just chemistry. It just wasn't working. It happens. I've been in those situations. So if we could talk about Des Dickerson there for a minute, just I still have to do more research on his playing and whatever. I had heard, I don't know if it's true or not. I'll ask you this, but I had heard that one of the reasons he kind of left was he just didn't like. I don't know if he became more religious or he was religious. He didn't kind of like the sexual aspect of some of the performance, maybe.
Yeah, I think there's another band member called Gail Chapman who played keys for Prince, and if you look at the Dirty Mind era where Prince is coming out and he's basically got drawers and an overcoat on, and he's asking the keyboard player to French kiss him during a song, and I mean it was quite risque. It's certainly not the Prince of Purple Rain that everybody knows. And I think it was wearing on a few of them because these guys are Minnesotan, aren't they? They're inherently there's a religion aspect to that part of the world, and Prince was really pushing the envelope at times. So whether Des also wanted to be his own frontman and have his own band, and then of course it's a nice easy excuse to say that my religious beliefs are at odds with what I'm seeing. I think there's 50% of one and 50% of the other, because Des ultimately did want to go on and be his own lead man.
Of course, we're jumping around topics. It's great to have you here, and it's great to kind of talk about this. Again, we'll definitely want to do a part 2 to this. So if I'm jumping around, remember, folks, comment in the comment section of all the questions you want for the next discussion. I want to talk about Prince's dad and also his stepfather. But if we talk about Prince's dad, we had some people comment that they had heard that his father had played with Miles Davis. Now, I am aware of Miles Davis. I am a jazz aficionado too. I did not know that. Someone did send me a link to Prince's father's recordings of his work that I'm looking forward to listening to. I've never heard that, though, that his dad played with Miles Davis. Have you? I'd like to verify that somehow.
No, I mean, it's something that the Miles Davis law around Prince is something that we've all dug into. And over the last couple of years, because of the re-releases of albums that were made during the period where he knew Miles, there's obviously been a lot of stories coming forward, and people have been, sort of refreshing the stories. There's no evidence that John L. Nelson, Prince's father, had met Miles Davis before his son introduced Miles Davis to him.
Okay.
And that was in 1987. They were having a meal at Prince's house. It was Prince, his father, Sheila E., the drummer percussionist, and Eric Leeds, who was Prince's sax player, who idolized Miles Davis.
Oh, I bet.
So it was quite an intimate, and a lovely evening for all involved. The memory that they all speak of is Miles playing the piano as he walked through the lobby of the house. Which I would have loved to have seen, because I would imagine Miles wasn't, sloppy on the keys. I would imagine he was quite the musician on anything he picked up.
Yeah.
But there's no evidence that John L. Nelson, because he was a well-known musician in Minneapolis, but he wasn't, a hugely successful musician, truth be told. From everything that we know about him, and certainly what the bits that I know, he was locally very well respected, but we're not talking Miles Davis's radar here. Okay.
Well, if anyone knows any different, please post a link in the comments or fill us in, because I'm really open-minded to learning. So one of the things that I always keep emphasizing, because every time I watch a Prince video and do a reaction, I'm always seeing something new, right? Like he brought out a frickin' marching band on the Super Bowl performance, right?
You love that marching band.
I think even if someone's a prodigy, they still have to put in the work. Okay. So, he had to practice and work at playing piano, even if it came easier to him than it would somebody else. He obviously had to put in a lot of time on the guitar. He plays drums. I don't even want to get into trying to list everything he can do. But what I'm trying to get at right now is his motivation. So he had an interesting home life. So his father was a pianist, a jazz pianist. So he would have been around that. So from what I understand, piano was his first instrument.
Yes, it was. It's not as clear cut as it sounds, though, because I think the inference there is that his dad taught him how to play piano, and that's not the relationship that they had. In fact, he was often forbidden from playing the piano because if he wasn't immediately great at it, the father would be quite stern with him and say, "Don't touch the instrument." Certainly, this is what we've all been led to believe. So, in that sense, you could argue that the Purple Rain movie is semi-autobiographical, and I think that that's one of the truths is that the father wasn't very nurturing to him as a musician.
So,
but piano is his first instrument, yes.
So he started with piano. I'm assuming his dad probably had some music books, maybe some theory books kicking around. Now, on that note, I'm curious, and I have to ask while it's in my head, as he became successful, how was his relationship with his father as he became more and more successful?
Yeah, so looking in from the outside, which is all I can do.
Yeah.
He sort of faded in and out of getting along with his father. But I think once he established himself as the superstar musician, so around the time of the 1999 album, so 82, 83, he actually gave one of his houses to his father when he moved to a bigger house. And they seemed to stay reconciled right up until his father's death in 2001.
Okay.
And the dad passed away still living in that house that his son had given him. And it seemed that over the years, he would sort of attribute or co-write a song with his father, but there was very little to indicate that maybe the dad had actually contributed. So maybe that was a way of giving him an income via the royalties, or maybe he'd used a melody that he attributed to his father from when he was younger and he'd overheard it. Could be any number of reasons.
When I kind of hear about that type of relationship, like Johnny Cash's father, I don't believe was musical, but his kind of dysfunctional relationship is part of what I think fueled Johnny Cash. So sometimes when you hear about that with musicians, like obviously Prince must have been driven beyond driven. I don't know if it was OCD or what, musically, to do what he's just to be proficient on that many instruments alone. So is it safe to assume that how his father treated him, maybe he didn't get a certain type of respect, a love, a certain type of a pat on the back from his father? That's why he just had that "I'll show you" attitude. That kind of interests me.
So Prince himself, he did his final tour on just the piano and a microphone tour.
Yeah.
And he actually says in some of them, the recordings that have leaked out that we've heard, he actually talks about his father and the piano and how, he wanted to get good at the piano so that he could prove to his father he was justified in trying to play the instrument. I've heard snippets of his father play, and obviously the album that you referenced earlier was created and played at Paisley Park, but the father was long past. Prince had passed, but the estate and the family got the father's music and actually recorded it in Paisley Park, which is something that if that happened while Prince was alive, there was nothing released and it might be sitting in the vault. But it seems the first time that the John L's music was actually played.
Well, I'm going to make it kind of a tie over. My heart goes out to Prince on that aspect, and I'm going to tell you guys as an instructor. I'm going to tell everyone a secret here. Okay, there's a lot of bad guitar teachers out there, and what happens when I don't teach kids the way I used to. I used to have a very heavy curriculum, and I used to have a really big roster of students. I used to teach at one point over 100 students a week, and when I would teach kids, it's usually a short relationship, right? They have a novelty. Oh, great. But they usually, the reality is that the child will take lessons for, a month or 2 months at the most. And then it's, oh my, you put a PlayStation and a TV and a controller on one side of the room, and then a guitar and a stand and, anyway. But I always try and make their first experience to the music fun, because if they have I had a very bad experience when I was young, almost traumatic, with a music teacher and when I was in elementary school. And I had heard later on that there's other people that had that same, not a very nice person. This teacher had passed a few months ago. So, that affected me down the road, right? So I try to make the first exposure to the instrument fun for the kids. So they remember, they think, oh, because if it's not good, then they'll always look at the guitar and think, man, I hate that guitar. That guy was so mean to me, so now with Prince, it's even more personal because it's his father. So I feel, that little bit of dysfunction or whatever it was probably part of the fuel that helped him.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. And I would also just expand on it and say, as a son myself, what your father does sort of always casts a shadow on you. And
Yeah.
I think most men in some way battle the memory or the image of their father throughout their life, certainly their nascent years. So yes, I agree that most of Prince striving to be so successful and maybe driving his band so hard is partly because of his father, partly because of someone like James Brown, who he looked up to, and he James ran a hard band and would fine his musicians if they missed a beat or something. So there's all these different influences, but I don't think you can ever underestimate how important the influence of his father has been.
Yeah, no, for
And
sure.
his mother, she's almost overlooked, Mattie Shaw, but she was a jazz singer who met John L. Nelson, and then obviously he's got two musical parents. But Mattie's often overlooked because John L. played an instrument. But I think if you look at what he tried to do in his later life, I think he tried to lay to rest both of his parents and the memory of both of them. So there's definitely aspects of his vocal performance that I would imagine his mother was essential in providing to him.
Yeah, his vocals. I did that one last week. I Love You, But I Can't Trust You. That was, again, a great suggestion by Wanda Manning. She's another favorited commenter here. It blew me away. And it wasn't just his vocal ability, because he was so in pitch, but also how he used the range between the mic for the dynamics of the song. It's just, a lot of people wouldn't know that. It's just me kind of being in the performance field. I'm like, oh my God, like, where does it end with this guy? He's amazing. But I want
a lifetime of just practice. I mean, all of it can just be attributed to the hours he put in. If people talk about 10,000 to become a master, he probably put in 100,000.
Yeah, the experience, folks. Like at the end of the, I did a Steve Ray Vaughan reaction video the other day, and I talked at the end extensively about experience and playing live. I even said a really funny live story that happened to me, but I won't repeat here. But I also wanted to get so his stepfather, was his stepfather musical? Do you know?
I don't believe so.
Okay, he was just.
I recall seeing.
So this brings me back to the movie Purple Rain. Was that the man portraying the male figure in the house who was mean to his mother? Was that more based on the father, or was it kind of a combination of the father, stepfather?
Yeah, I mean, the character in Purple Rain is Francis L, and his real father was John L. Okay. So I think that they're pointing the finger quite strongly that it's meant to be his real father.
Okay.
And I certainly think there were elements of that were accurate based on what everybody around him at the time said, including what Prince alluded to himself. But I think there's other things in there that are quite problematic as well. Like the mixed race relationship. His mother wasn't white. Prince had African American parents on both sides. So there's things that if you look too closely at Purple Rain and you start to try and join the dots, it's not 100% biographical, and it becomes problematic if you try to infer too much from Purple Rain.
Yeah. Okay. And that's just the way my brain works, right? I'm looking at, but again, the first time I watched Purple Rain, I'm like, I watched it going, what the hell is, but after everyone educated me, I watched it the second time through and I enjoyed it a lot more. So another question I want to get to, again, folks, like we could talk for hours about Prince. So we might do this as a series, do another one in a couple of weeks. And again, in the comments, you guys, let us know questions, comments, whatever. I wanted to talk for a second. We'll probably get to talking about Paisley Park in a different episode. I'm definitely going to be going there next year. Maybe when the whole thing with the border and what's going on in the world kind of calms down a little bit. But Paisley Park, he had it built in 1987.
Yeah, opened in 87. I think officially they started building it in 86.
Okay.
And it opened on a kind of a staggered open. So I did some research into this for one of those videos that you very kindly used as material.
Yes.
The admin staff that he had, basically running the production staff, they all moved in I believe it was May of 1987. But the actual studio wasn't complete. So it was maybe September by the time he was able to come and record. And he was actually on tour in Europe, doing a very, very big tour, an expensive tour that never made it to America. And I think he was just being petulant. I think he cancelled the American leg because he wanted to go and play in his new studio, which was Paisley Park. So the reason why the Sign of the Times tour never made America, and instead the world got a video concert, was because Paisley Park was just finished and he was able to go in and fulfill all of his creative desires.
Well, one of the things, now I could be completely wrong, and of course I'm going to refer to you this, what kind of threw me is that Paisley Park was made in 87. So Prince had been around for a while. No doubt he's had some success, some financial success, but to do what he does, I think sometimes people don't understand the expenses, especially when it's your band, it's your name, you're signing the checks, you're paying the bills. So I don't know. I'm kind of curious as to how he financed that in 87. I'm sure he was wealthy and doing okay. But when I heard the price tag was $10 million, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, you have to remember though, Purple Rain sold 14 million copies in 1984, 85.
Okay.
And then of course he's got, I think it was 96 dates for the Purple Rain tour in 1985.
Okay.
Which is by far the biggest tour that he ever did. Certainly in 8-9 months. So yes, he has a lot of money, but he has a lot of money because the royalties coming off the album, yourself, the royalty system in the 1980s, it could be 2.5 years before the money actually filters through to him.
Yeah.
So I think the negotiation with Warner Brothers was, you're going to cut me these checks for the royalties. I'd sooner you just pay to build this thing instead of write me the check.
Okay.
And obviously he had the concert income from the tour of Purple Rain.
Okay.
So by 87, I mean, I don't know specific figures, but I would imagine he's very comfortably in the double-digit million category.
And if he has that kind of income, at the very least, if he went into a bank to help with some financing, it would have been a big deal. Kind of keeping to that timeline, I'm kind of hoping, I still want to keep the videos short enough for people to, I know for me, when I see a video is 2 hours long, I'm like, oh, I don't know. But I hope to have several of these with you, get everyone's feedback. And then, but I also want to talk about, I did I watched a few of the interviews with Morris Day in preparation for this. So his whole character was created by Prince.
Yeah, I think it was kind of underestimated how much it was Prince, because the Prince that everybody saw in the early 80s was this shy, reclusive guy who went on stage and was incredibly risque, but also the music that he was putting out under the Prince name was trying to at least cater to the mainstream, take the mainstream on a journey, but it was mainstream nonetheless. It was music that would chart, but it left a hole where he wanted to do music that was almost straight up funk and for the clubs. And Morris Day was a childhood friend, was a photographer on some of the early tours and would, be one of the entourage. And I think, there was a talk of there being a pact that Morris had written a song called Party Up on the Dirty Mind album. And Prince had said, you can have, I believe the true figure was $20,000 for the song, or I can make you a band and put you as the front man of the band. And Morris took the band, and the time was born. But in the studio, the time is Prince on everything other than drums and Morris on drums. And Morris is a fantastic drummer who was heavily influenced by, is it Dave Garibaldi from Tower of Power? So he was, these are the kind of upper echelon of professional drummers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So Morris played all the drums, Prince did everything else. And the first two Time albums are effectively, it's Prince doing everything with Morris, and then other people would copy his lead vocal.
Do you ever watch those Tales from the Tour Bus, like little cartoon videos about I remember not long ago, obviously I'm doing a lot of research into Prince, but I'm watching them and I really get a big kick out of them. I still have a bunch more to watch, but there's some interesting Morris Day stories on that or whatever. But I was just curious as to if you ever watched them.
I did, and you mentioned the Morris Day persona coming from Prince. So the Time albums are one of the many times that Prince used pseudonyms.
Yeah.
And he created a pseudonym called Jamie Starr, and Jamie Starr was the producer of the Time albums. Jamie Starr is basically the Morris Day persona.
Okay.
When Prince would do it in the studio, it would be one of the guys and, cooler than cool. And that Jamie Starr persona, when Prince did that, sort of influenced what Morris would then go out and copy on stage.
I think what we're going to do is I'm going to have one more question, one more quick discussion piece. We're going to go back to Des Dickerson for a second, and then we'll wrap it up for this episode. And then maybe in a few weeks, we'll do this again and we'll get everyone's feedback and questions and comments. So Prince was already, he clearly he was a great lead guitar player. So why some people might say, why did he hire Des Dickerson? Was it just to have his complete band and he can step in and out of whatever instrument he wanted to during the performance? Or
I think there was part of that, but I think at that point in Prince's career, not only did he need to move around and be a lead of a band, so he needed to be mobile, but Des was probably a better rock guitarist than Prince was at that point in Prince's career. So Des came in. If you listen to the song Little Red Corvette, it's Des that plays that solo.
Okay.
And it's a composite. It's 3 or 4 of his attempts that have been, combined into one. But that's not Prince who's playing that. Later on, after he disbands the Revolution, and Wendy Melvoin, who had taken over from Des as the lead guitarist of the Revolution, Prince then starts to play his own guitar on stage.
Okay.
He doesn't have anyone. And I think in those years, just from my own personal opinion, I think he grew as a guitarist because he always had to try and beat the guy who was in the band and be better than them. And I know it's pretty common when you read YouTube comment sections that Prince was better than everyone in his band on all the instruments. Well, that's not really true.
Yeah.
He was probably better than his early bands on their instruments, where he couldn't play a saxophone, couldn't play any brass, any woodwind.
Okay.
So if you were a saxophone player in Prince's band, he could tell you where he wanted to hear, but he couldn't show you. Whereas he could lean over on a bass or a keyboard or on a drum kit, and he could actually demonstrate it. So I think he used the level of the band, the ability of the band, to keep him learning. And that's one of the things when you look at the entire arc now of his career, he really put the effort in. Like the amount of effort he put into the piano for that final, what turned out to be the final tour. He went at that like it was a new instrument to him. There's talk of him playing the same song for 6 or 7 hours at Paisley in an empty soundstage just to get that part right. So he kept challenging himself, and I think the level of the band members kept giving him something to emulate and push past, and it was a constant battle back and forth.
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll wind it down there. This is part 1 of our Prince discussion with the solitary adventurer. You all know him from the comment section. To me, he's like my own. I refer to him as the Prince encyclopedia. But again, you guys give us your feedback in the comments, questions, good, bad, everything's good in my book. And we will get back to another session with the solitary adventurer. We really appreciate him coming on. And so we'll have him on again in a few weeks. So remember, practice hard, practice smart, and we'll see you soon.